you can't exclude that disruption will exist. Therefore, you need to have an alternative. And the alternative needs to be a real alternative. So just having a double sourcing capable of doing 20% of your volume is not really an edge.
We are back today with another phenomenal Unfiltered Freight interview. I came across Federico from a recent post that he put up on LinkedIn. Federico Marchesi, he's the Chief Supply Chain Officer at Hire Europe. He has experience from Whirlpool and Brembo. So first of all, Federico, thank you so much for joining. Excited to have you here.
Thank you, Eytan, for inviting me. It's a pleasure.
What really struck me, your post about Porsche said like, hey, we are going through the exact same problems that we all experienced in COVID, right? That there were some major lessons that we learned there, and now we're learning them again. And that's what's spelling out real problems, particularly for car manufacturers, but really for a lot of supply chain organizations.
So, well, the core idea of the post was actually that people are freaking out that Germany is just breaking down or anything like that. Manufacturing is not feasible. But no one was actually looking at the fact that there is a supply chain issue underlying. So the thesis is the company is not doing as bad as we think, but the supply chain is more a strategic issue.
For me, like one of my main takeaways was just-in-time manufacturing just did not work, right? It did not prove itself during COVID. What is the alternative right now to keep those global freight flows moving?
Just-in-time manufacturing is just not going to work because of the disruption. That's it. We built it in a world that was getting more integrated. It was more stable. So what I describe is the environment we built it does not exist outside the four walls of a factory of a warehouse. The alternative is, and I'm using a bit of a quotation from Eli Goldratt, we need to have process that think in terms of flow of product rather than pure optimization. So we need to revisit the way we use inventory, and we need to revisit the way we interact with suppliers and in general in the network called supply chain.
I spoke to somebody from Schlumberger a couple of weeks ago who was talking about trying to recreate much more dynamic network designs where you're revisiting it every 6 months. From your perspective, like what is the alternative that can keep international trade so interconnected without compromising on that reliability? Because the other only option that I can think of is something that's going to piss off every CFO, which is just like, hey, stock up, give me more warehouse space. Let me have more, spare parts sitting on my balance sheet. So what is the alternative?
In supply chain, stock is the ultimate edge. So stock will play a role. Now, supply chain professional, and I think a lot of us went through the same process. Pre-COVID, you just need to lower the stock. That's it. COVID, a lot of pressure on delivering the product, disruption, and so on. Interest rate went down significantly. Suddenly, everyone was not caring about stock. And then when inflation went up, interest rate went up, we somehow overreact. And again, reduce the stock and so on. So we develop our own bullwhip effect. So stock plays a role. I know CFO don't like it, but it is what it is. If you want to have flow, you need to have stock. Now, there are some other way to deal with the disruption. One is vertical integration. We see more and more competitive, successful Far East manufacturer being more vertically integrated. And I would, let's say, just throw in the group also Tesla. The second one is redundancy. Whether you call it China plus one, whether you call it double sourcing, and so on. This is vital. You can't exclude that disruption will exist. Therefore, you need to have an alternative. And the alternative needs to be a real alternative. So just having a double sourcing capable of doing 20% of your volume is not really an edge. You need to have real capability for a material amount of your volume and capabilities.
More stock costs money. Replicating your supply chain in two locations, or in two alternatives costs money. I know the theoretical argument with the CFO is it's going to cost us a whole hell of a lot more if we don't do this. but it's harder to put down so much money just to be ready for an eventuality that may not pan out. So how do you have that conversation?
I think again, during COVID, we got a bit of a glimpse of what a real disruption is and what it might cost. So supply chain leader today have it a bit easier than what it was in 2018 or 19. So this conversation can happen today, more balancing out risk and trade-offs. The second point is that you really need to embrace the logic of flow. And not only supply chain, you need to embrace in the organization with finance, with operation. If you start to think in terms of flow of value, some of these decisions suddenly become less expensive. When you think in terms of flow, when you think in terms of how you generate cash, the fixed cost of having a warehouse takes a completely different logic. Some duplication are expensive. And the real trick of supply chain leader is to define where in your process you're willing to spend a bit more to get a disproportionate edging against disruption.
A lot of our listeners are more on the global freight side of things, and they've been, through a fairly crazy year right now with ocean freight rates, and coming off of a fairly crazy 5 years or 6 years now of ocean freight rates. How have you experienced, and I know this, is probably buried deep within your org, but how have you experienced the freight procurement side of things, meeting your inventory strategy?
We are what I call a mid-size shipper. We ship around, I would say, ballpark 40 to 50,000 containers per year between China to Europe and Turkey to Europe. Cost is a very important challenge in my industry. It's a very low margin, requires a lot of efficiency. So definitely when we run tender, cost is a critical factor in our decision. Now, we are coping or we are working a lot with risk matrix and reliability matrix. For example, very simple, we never award one lane only to one company. We want to have a couple of options to protect ourselves in case of blank sailing or anything like that. We are changing our logistic network to make sure that we have warehouses in places where we can serve from 2 ports at least. So if there are disruptions, we have a bit of redundancies. And this is part of the decision we take when we award lanes or when we award different, I would say, business. The other thing we are doing a lot is real-time tracking. That's something that changed a lot the way we operate in the last 18 months. This allows us to take more day-to-day operational decision based on what's happening real time with our container. We do have some degree of freedom in dealing with our customer or reallocating product that allow us to cope with disruption. And really this improvement in real-time tracking is proving very valuable.
That's awesome to hear, because I feel like there's been so much people just like talk about real-time visibility, and the challenge to that is always, yeah, you have the data, but can you act on it? I saw you had posted a while back, talking about Nissim Taleb and a little bit of his approach. And there's one thing that's always like kind of been living rent-free in my head for a long time, where he talks about how over the years we've gotten so much more interdependent, right? And that a earthquake in Japan that would have a fairly minor effect, 100 years ago, now could bring global supply chains, to their knees for a short period of time. Where does that meet you when something can happen at any given moment? And how are you trying to defend yourself or prepare in order to build up resilience?
Let me be honest and transparent. I love Nassim Taleb. I would not define my supply chain as anti-fragile. I would define my supply chain as robust.
By the way, I don't think there's any supply chain in the world that is anti-fragile. So
I would have to think about it, but I tend to agree with what you said. So we are working a lot with concept of being more robust, more resilient. We know that our supply chain will break if something very big happen. Our role is always to find the trade-off where you can bring your level of resilience a bit higher without necessarily bringing in too much cost or too much waste that the consumer is not willing to pay for. At the end of the day, sometimes cost is good if the consumer is willing to pay for it. We use a lot inventory in a strategic way. Inventory is not the same. Where the inventory is placed geographically, physically, plays a different. Which type of inventory we keep in the different flow of our chain plays a different role. For example, we like a lot having inventory in a container outside a port because we can decide to reallocate last minute. We don't like a lot inventory sitting in our, just outside our factories on the other side of the globe. Just to make a very simple, straightforward example. We like inventory of products that are low rotating, because it means we can react to supplier, to customer requests very quick. We don't like to hold a lot of inventory of running product, because technically that's not what the customer is paying for.
So I totally hear that. Federico, this has been awesome. Thank you so much for taking the time. It's been great to have you on the show.